Hello, I'm Jonasz Rewiński. Welcome on board the Eastern Express, and as always, I hope you enjoy the journey. This time around, we turn our attention to Georgia, or as I like to call it, democracy's worst roller coaster. Georgia is at a crossroads, and unlike those calm, picturesque country roads you might see in a tourism ad, this one feels more like a 5-lane roundabout with no exit in sight. The problem? Georgia's political opposition is fractious. Think of it like a bickering family road trip, except instead of arguing over which exit to take, they are brawling over who should be in the driver's seat, while the car is speeding towards a cliff. Without further ado, let's take a look at our latest report to see where this perilous road may take us.
Parliamentary elections in Georgia, the country's key political event, are fast approaching. With the unofficial election campaign already underway, both the ruling Georgian Dream Party, now in its third term in power, and the opposition are likely to come out on top. The Georgian Dream has a good chance of winning its fourth consecutive parliamentary election. Polls have shown that the party can count on between 35% and 55% of voter support. Enough to secure victory, though without a guaranteed parliamentary majority. Achieving one will depend on whether smaller opposition parties manage to cross the 5% electoral threshold. If they fail, votes cast for them will largely be added to the winning party's pool. So far, the Georgian Dream Party has done little in terms of presenting a coherent program, other than to spook voters by demonizing the main opposition party, the United National Movement. Victor Kipiani, an oligarch and founder of Georgian Dream, has been particularly vocal on the subject.
Ivanishvili is a person, pro-Russian tycoon, oligarch, who earned a lot of money in Russia in the 90s. And of course, he's a #1 agent of influence from Russia. And of course, he wants to monopolize the power with his law.
Analysts argue that Ivanishvili's return to active politics indicates the ruling camp's dread of losing power, as they fear the release and power takeover by former President Mikhail Saakashvili. Another anxiety is a new government likely holding the Georgian Dream Party accountable for its actions. But the chances of pro-Western opposition seizing power are equally high. The largest opposition party, the United National Movement, can count on about 15 to 25% of votes. Although the movement has allied itself with the strategy Agmashenebeli party, the alliance lacks a charismatic and capable leader. Another issue marring the coalition's reputation are rumors that the movement intends to make Saakashvili Georgia's prime minister. This, however, is largely unacceptable to other opposition parties.
And now, as always, let's take a look at the issue in greater detail. Georgia is recovering from decades of authoritarianism in the Soviet Union, and later, years of corruption. Oh, and also this little thing called being invaded by Russia. Sounds familiar? Anyway, as you can see, the stakes are high. The country is supposed to be moving toward a bright, shiny future as a democracy. And as part of that, Georgia has had its eye on joining the European Union and NATO. But in order to get a seat at the big kids' table, you need some semblance of political stability. Something Georgia's opposition parties seem to have collectively decided isn't really their style. Meanwhile, the ruling party, Georgian Dream, is hardly the most beloved entity on the country's political scene, especially after some questionable democratic practices, to put it lightly. So, you would think the opposition would be united against them, right? Wrong. They are fragmented into so many splinter groups it's starting to resemble a Jackson Pollock painting, full of passion, but all over the place. We've got the ever so ironically named United National Movement, the party of former President Mikhail Saakashvili, who is currently imprisoned. There are smaller, liberal and pro-European groups, conservative factions, and every variation in between. And the public isn't thrilled about this political free-for-all. In fact, many Georgians feel like they're watching a bad soap opera they never subscribed to. There is disillusionment, fatigue, and worst of all, a growing sense of apathy. It's like watching a group project where everyone wants to be the leader, but no one wants to do the actual work. And guess who suffers? That's right, the people who are trying to live their lives in a country with unresolved political crises, struggling institutions and constant external pressure from, you guessed it, Russia. Yeah, Russia looms large in all of this. They invaded Georgia back in 2008, and since then Moscow's influence has never fully gone away. Georgian Dream, the ruling party, is way too cozy with Russia for comfort. Their leader, Byzina Ivanishvili, even claimed Georgians should apologize for the 2008 invasion. Apologizing on behalf of a country invading your territory is a whole new different level of subordination. But anyhow, if Georgia's opposition parties could just get their act together, they might have a real shot at steering the country toward a future where Europe and NATO aren't distant dreams, but achievable realities. Because here is the reality. A weak and divided opposition means Georgian Dream gets to stay in power, unchecked. And the longer that happens, the more Georgia risks sliding away from its democratic path. Worse still, with every internal conflict and delay, they give Russia more opportunities to meddle in their affairs. And now, here to shed more light on the issue is Victor Kipiani, chairman at Geocase. Hello and welcome to Eastern Express.
Thank you for having me. Thank you. Hello.
So it would seem that the opposition in Georgia has all the incentives to unite, and yet they are not doing this. Why is this a case?
I've been saying for some time that the biggest ally for the Georgian Dream is the Georgian opposition, and that's been sadly the truth for quite some time. Although I have to admit that over the recent few months, the Georgian opposition has consolidated enough. So at this moment, as we speak, they are in much better shape. Although there is, of course, some room for the further consolidation. And as we're discussing the shape of the Georgian opposition at this point, I have to mention necessarily that yesterday we have witnessed a very major setback in terms of a merger or the electoral merger between some mainstream Georgian parties, opposition parties, who could well position themselves as the, let's put it this way, middle power center force. The names won't tell you much, but again, that's been a major setup. And again, I have to repeat that to some extent. What I've been saying that the Georgian opposition, unwillingly, of course, unwillingly and unintentionally, to some extent, plays into the hands of Georgian Dream. The yesterday discussions, which have ended with no result, have again acknowledged or reconfirmed the truth of this saying. But it's not enough. It's not plenty of time, but still there is a 1 week left till some formalities, electoral formalities are not over, and we have hopefully, fingers crossed, to expect some further consolidation. So we'll see.
So let's talk about those incentives. I mean, the number one incentive would be what the Georgian Dream officials said recently. They openly proclaimed that should they win this election, they are going to ban major opposition forces. And it is not something that you actually hear very often. Normally you have a given party that has authoritarian tendencies winning an election without announcing anything major, and later on it all begins to come to light. But here there is an open promise of banning these parties from participating in the public debate and in the political scene in the country. Why wouldn't this single promise, this single announcement, cause all the parties to rally together? I mean, this is as bad as it gets for the opposition, doesn't it?
I completely subscribe to what you've said, and what distinguishes these elections in a very negative manner, those awkward statements which have nothing to do with a positive development agenda, and it was a positive agenda at all. And my concern, and not just my concern, but the concern of many Georgians, that what we hear these days, those very awkward and very bizarre and very weird statements, actually they mean it. And this is, the biggest concern. So that could not be just for the electoral purposes or for election purposes, but that's something, which could well be on their radars, in their plans. Now, and of course, when speaking about incentives, that could be the biggest incentive for the Georgian opposition to unite and to present itself in a more consolidated way. But with your permission, I would also setting aside that very shameful side of the story, I would rather also introduce more positive the incentives to put them in a way. And those incentives are twofold. Incentive number one are the public moods and the public sentiments on the ground, which could be really a very powerful incentive for the Georgian opposition to translate those sentiments and those feelings into any tangible and actual and real results. That's one point. And the second point, unwavering support of our international partners. So I think that those two ingredients this time will play into the hands of the Georgian opposition. So all what is required from them is to combine those ingredients, to shape those ingredients in more coherency in the course of their electoral campaign, and be more responsible, not just for the elections, but for what follows up after the elections. Because one small point, and I would rather wrap up my response to your question, that these elections are also unique in the sense that the elections on the 26th of October are not just about the power, but those elections are about the geopolitics. And that's something which we've not witnessed before to such a large extent as we're witnessing this time.
So now, you've mentioned geopolitics, and obviously Russia is at the center of things. They're having invaded Georgia, having imposed its rule on two of Georgia's regions, which are these quasi-states that nobody recognizes, South Ossetia and Abkhazia. And now, despite all this, we have a government that is semi-allied with Moscow, although it is pretending that it is not, still actually holding on to power, still actually managing to control the public narratives. Why is it so, really? What are the advantages that the Georgian Dream Party are presenting as its successors? It is said that it's the economy, but is the economy alone enough to convince people that they might actually want to vote for a party that is at least partially pro-Russian, but also that promises to go authoritarian if it wins the elections?
Thank you for the question, which is really very complex. I'm not exactly precisely sure how much we will be able to handle, but let me just give you a few glimpses and a few insights from my side. By the way, I have to point out necessarily that there is no South Ossetia in Georgia, but there is occupied region of Samachavlo. That's very important, because when we say and repeat South Ossetia, we say that to the advantage of the Russian propaganda. Now, to your question about Georgia Dream being aligned with Kremlin, of course, we don't have any direct evidence, and would be extremely irresponsible and unserious to speak about sort of, a formal alignment or informal alignment. But the type of governance which we face in Georgia these days very much comes close to what we see in the Russian Federation, and that what is of particular concern to us.
Like the foreign agents, for example.
Exactly. And on top of that, the type of governance, and also in recognition of the fact that even Georgian Dream claims persistently that they're committed to pro-European path. And regardless of that formally declared commitment and different assessments, or opinions or statements which we hear from our European partners in relation to that specific piece of legislation, or some other legislation, or some other actions by Georgian government, still continuing that same very much anti-European path really rings a bell. And that's probably where those suspicions about what's happening behind, they're surfacing, those suspicions. And of course, I'm not in position to give any direct responses to any type of similar accusations. But I have to admit that that position, that politics, and those policies are completely unsettling and completely run against the Georgian pro-European path, but what is more important, the expectations of most of Georgians.
So, I mean, that would also include the narratives presented recently by the likes of Bidzina Ivanishvili, the informal leader of the party and former Russian oligarch. He recently said that there is a grand party of war at work there behind the scenes, hoping to drag Georgia into a conflict with Russia. Essentially, that it is all the fault of the West, that the opposition parties are serving the West. How can you reconcile this sort of narrative with, on the other hand, promising that, no, we're not deviating from our path towards the European Union. In fact, we want to join the European Union, but we want to do this with dignity, with control. I mean, these two narratives don't really seem to align, do they?
Absolutely. It's really extremely hard and extremely challenging to reconcile those narratives, especially when these days when the Georgian policymaking is very much tainted and very much entangled with conspiracy theories. So, frankly speaking, it's really, I feel myself in a very awkward position when I speak about the Georgian politics, domestically or internationally, how you could speak about the politics as much when it is so much about the conspiracy. And that connotation of the global war body, which has been repeated continuously and which is sort of, the driving message of the Georgian dream, is really speaks about absence of any the well-qualified or serious contents in terms of making Georgian policies by official stakeholders, unfortunately, regretfully, and sadly for us. And also, I forgot to mention to your previous question, when we speak about that dilemma about making choice between peace and the war and stability or instability. Just a quick pair of questions to those who are advocating for this sort of stability or the peace agenda. The sheer fact that Georgia continues to stay under the Russian occupation, at least major patches of Georgian lands, does that mean that we have a peace? Or the fact that the creeping annexation and borderization has never stopped but continues on a regular basis, does that create an impression of stability? Or does that toxic language about polarizing Georgian society, is it about stability and peaceful manner inside of Georgia? I think that the responses to every single of those questions is quite obvious. So based on that, how it's possible at all to speak about peace and stability.
Victor Kipiani was our guest today here on Eastern Express. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your expertise.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
And now we're moving on to Eastern News Flash, a series of all the other stories from the East that you really don't want to miss. With his decade-long term drawing to an end, NATO chief Jens Stoltenberg has warned the alliance against isolationism. In his farewell speech, the Norwegian politician urged member states to step up defense spending.
On Friday, the NATO Secretary-General summarized his 10-year tenure in a speech at NATO headquarters in Brussels. While he praised the alliance members for meeting the target annual defense spending of 2% of GDP per individual state, he also warned that threshold is no longer enough to keep the alliance safe from an increasingly assertive Russia. Stoltenberg argued that Russia should be approached from a position of strength and that any prospective peace deal between Ukraine and Russia must be backed by strong and sustained military support and not just on paper. Acknowledging the limits of NATO's military prowess, Stoltenberg said the purpose of any future military operation outside NATO territory must be clearly defined. The outgoing NATO chief will return to his native Norway to assume the post of central bank governor. His successor, former Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte, is expected to take over the reins of the alliance on October 1st.
The United States has imposed sanctions in light of the ever tighter cooperation between Russia and North Korea. Here is the full story.
The US sanctioned 5 organized groups and 1 individual based in Russia and the Georgian region of South Ossetia, accused of enabling financial transactions between Moscow and Pyongyang. The plot exposes Russia's attempts at circumventing international sanctions and North Korea's relentless pursuit of weapons programs. In the context of the ongoing war in Ukraine, this proves the US commitment to disrupting illegal financial schemes designed to support Russia's war effort. Recent reports have shown that Russia has become increasingly dependent on North Korean weapons, munitions, and economic ties.
You can usually see the Made in India tag on virtually any piece of clothing bought at your local fast fashion store. Apparently, the same applies to the shells provided to Ukrainian artillery. And boy, has this driven Moscow up the wall.
For more than a year now, European customers have been diverting India-made artillery munitions to Ukraine. Still, New Delhi has not intervened to stop the trade, despite Moscow's indignation. India has been nurturing its growing ambitions as an arms exporter regardless of the potential damage to its relations with Russia. India's Foreign Affairs Ministry claimed in January India had not provided or sold artillery shells to Ukraine. According to the Indian Defense Ministry and two arms industry sources, New Delhi produced only under 1% of the total arms imported by Kiev since the start of the war. Italy and the Czech Republic are among the European countries diverting Indian shells to Kiev. Indian arm exports regulations limit the use of weaponry strictly to the declared purchaser. In the case of non-compliance, future sales to the customer may be terminated.
And to wrap up, let's take a look at Moscow's Orwellian scheme intended to ban undocumented migrants from driving, marrying and enrolling their children at school. More on that in this report.
A central database of undocumented migrants will help Russian authorities to impose restrictions on the daily lives of undocumented migrants in the country. The database is being introduced in accordance with legislation signed by Russian President Vladimir Putin last month. The law provides a deportation regime allowing for the surveillance and expulsion of undocumented migrants without a court order. The database is still under construction, and according to a Russian police general, compiling it will call for a significant cooperation across governmental agencies. According to data from Russia's Interior Ministry, the number of migrants in the country has shrunk last year, from 8.5 million to 6.1 million as of September 2023. Russian authorities have become increasingly hardline on migration since the deadly terrorist attack on the Crocus concert hall in Moscow's suburbs in March. The suspected perpetrators were allegedly all citizens of Tajikistan.
And for this episode of Eastern Express, it's the end of the line. Please stay with us here on TVP World for more latest news and updates. I'm Jonasz Rewiński. Bye for now.